Hello!
Hey everybody, welcome back to Ranger Roundup. We are here at DeSoto National Memorial's Visitor Center in our theater. And with me today, I'm Ranger Alyssa and we have Ranger Rachel. So I'm going to hand it over to her to introduce our video today.
Yeah, so welcome back guys. So this is going to be Season 2, Episode 3, and the buzz is about pollination. So we're going to be talking to you about pollination, native bees, just all that good stuff. And then we're going to go through some different native bees and then talk about other pollinators that are in the area. So when you think of a pollinator, you normally think of a honeybee or a bumblebee. But that's not what we're going to be talking about today, because really honeybees are from Europe and we're going to be talking about the native bees that are here in North America.
Yeah. And before we get into talking about pollinators, we kind of have to talk about what pollination is. What does it mean to be a pollinator? And how do bees pollinate flowers? So we have this drawing up here, giving you a little bit of a visual of how pollination works and how it actually helps turn things into foods that we eat. So we have our bee up here. She's going from one flower to the next, and she's usually carrying some pollen right on her back legs. So she'll carry her pollen that she gets from this flower over to the next one, and then she'll end up putting that pollen onto the next flower right here. And what it'll do, that pollen will go down this little tube right here, meet up with some stuff down there, and then you have something called fertilization. So what fertilization ends up doing is turning all this stuff down here into seeds surrounded by fruit. And then you have your petals kind of wilting away and your fruit growing out, and then you end up with something like this, like our oranges, that have seeds and they're covered by fruit. So that's kind of why pollinators are important, because we need them to move all that pollen around so that all the flowers can end up making all the fruit that we rely on, and also that other things in the ecosystem relies on as well.
That's a great point. Yes. So like going back to also talking about honeybees and bumblebees, so there are actually 4,000 native bees in North America, and there are even more that people don't realize that are here and they haven't been discovered yet. We don't really know much about them, but native bees usually are solitary and they live in the ground, they do leaf cutter things, and we're going to be talking more about what kind of different native bees are out there. So they don't normally live in a hive like honeybees do. And they are just living in the ground and doing other stuff.
Yeah, and we actually have a few examples
Yes.
that we're going to be giving you today. So we're going to be talking about 3 native bees that have some really interesting facts.
Yes.
And yeah, qualities. That's a great
Yeah.
word for it. Qualities of like individual pollinators,
Yes.
which is really cool.
All right, so the first bee that we're going to be talking about today is going to be the squash and gourd bee. So they have co-evolved to actually just pollinate squash and gourds and pumpkins. So those are the bees that are going to be pollinating them. And they look kind of like honeybees, but they look completely different. So they have more of a reddish tint on them rather than the yellow that we know of today.
And they're also kind of striped, right? They
Yes.
have black and white stripes on
Yes.
them. And so that one's really cool. It kind of looks like a honeybee, kind
Yes.
of. You can still tell there's some differences.
Yes, definitely.
But the next one we're going to talk about doesn't look like a honeybee at all. So the one that we're going to show you next is called a blue orchard bee. So if you can see by the picture, it's completely different than any kind of honeybee you've ever seen. It's blue all over. It's almost kind of like shiny. And then it has like small little fur coming out everywhere. And they're pretty cool. They are a type of carpenter bee. So they specialize in mostly trees from the rose families, so like all of our sweet cherries that we get. And they'll carve little holes into pieces of wood, and that's where they'll live. So they don't live necessarily in a colony. As we were talking about with honeybees that live mostly together, and all these native bees that live mostly solitary. So,
And then,
pretty cool.
yeah, definitely. The last bee we're going to be talking about is called the southeast little leafcutter bee. And these bees, they are black and white, so they don't even look anything like the honeybees at all. So kind of like the other bees that we talked about, the one that was blue, the one that was more reddish, this bee is just black and white. So it looks kind of like a fly in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So what these bees do are something very incredible. So they go to a leaf and they cut a perfectly round circle, and then they use it to make a tube, and this protects them. It's a natural defense from like microbes in the area. And then they will make it into a very like slender tube, kind of like a straw, but with like little circles of leaves like cut onto them, and it becomes their home, and it's very interesting.
Yeah. And those are just three
Yes.
out of the thousands of native
Yes.
bees that we have in the United States. So they're very interesting. We encourage you to go look up some of the native bees that might live in your area. We mostly focused on ones that you can find here in Florida, but there's some that you can find all over. So there's a lot of other pollinators out there as well. There's not just bees, even though that's what we think about a lot, and they are very important. But some other pollinators are things that you might not think about. Monarch butterflies are really good pollinators. They like to pollinate milkweed, and they're really cool because they migrate during the season. So they'll start out in Canada, the northern United States, and they'll migrate all the way down to Mexico, which is really cool. We also have...
It's very incredible, the distance that they'll travel, and then they kind of just come down and they go all the way to Mexico, and then they do their cycle again, and they'll travel back. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and people will actually go watch monarch migrations, so they're really big.
Yes.
We also have bats that have kind of co-evolved with different kinds of cacti, and they are really good at pollinating cacti, mostly in like the southwest United States. We also have hummingbirds who have grown their like really large, what is it, a tongue?
Tongue, yeah.
A really large tongue, and they can only get the nectar from these certain flowers because the certain flowers are made just for these hummingbirds so they can pollinate. And a lot of other like small mammals too can brush up against flowers, move pollen that way. And there's a ton of pollinators that I feel like we don't give enough credit to, because our bees are really good at pollinating, but so are all these other things, which is really awesome.
Yes. Well, thanks for joining us today, guys. We hope you enjoy this segment about pollinators, and we'll see you next time.
Bye!